All right, we're live. I'm sitting here with Glenn Young. Glenn, how are you doing?
Doing well, Jorge. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a while since we've connected, since we last talked on the podcast. It's been, I don't know, a few years now, hasn't it?
2018.
2018. Wow. See, so I'm always kind of like I always kind of think back to some of the earlier podcasts and the ones that kind of resonate with me and the things I need to learn more about. I'm not even sure how long I've been doing the podcast. I always say like 7 years, but I'm not really even sure how long it's been. I've been in Saudi Arabia for four now. This is my fifth year, going on like 4.5, right? And so it's been at least like 6 or 7 years. So it's always kind of nice to kind of put those things in perspective and see like exactly how long I've been talking to interesting individuals like yourself.
Yeah, it's a real treat to have the all the different podcasts that you have. There's so many of them. I think it's over 130 of them. So
It's like
there's a
250.
lot. Oh, is there? Oh,
Yeah, it's
okay.
like
I've
250.
I've got a wrong count. So there's so much information there. Every professional should just try to find some time to catch two or three a week.
Yeah, and I've been, I think I've been kind of in a bit of a slump in the last few years. I think COVID kind of had a did its work on me a little bit as far as motivation goes. And I want to get back into it in the sense of like talking to more and learning from more people like yourself, and like I said before the podcast, we talked a little bit briefly before the podcast. I think it's great to have a bunch of different perspectives and then just kind of put them all on the table, and then learn from each other and figure out what's best in our context.
Absolutely, as many perspectives as you can get helps shape your own thinking.
So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, and it was a recent tweet I saw of yours, talking about social emotional learning, and I think a lot of times we think about social emotional learning, and it's almost become sort of like a buzzword in education, where you just kind of throw out, yeah, it's SEL,
Yeah,
and there isn't a lot of like depth there, or understanding. So I wanted to get your take on that. Like, what is social emotional learning, and what is it for? Who is it for? Give us a little bit about what social emotional learning is, especially in education.
yeah. SEL has really been. I don't want to say distill it to a fad, but I think it has been a real fad the last few years, especially coming out of COVID.
Mm,
Um, I think for me, the simplest way to look sort of I would define SEL, and I don't want to use like a castle definition or a textbook definition because I think most people can't remember that. So I'd like to go with sort of like a street definition. And for me, social emotional learning is really referring to skills to manage yourself, relate to others positively, and make responsible decisions. So, um, if students can't manage these types of skills, they aren't ready to learn. And so, um, SEL for me is the missing piece in our instructional practice because it's about getting students ready to learn. And so if they aren't ready to learn, um, we have to be able to dig in and find out why are they not in that state. And every child is different.
yeah.
And so that piece is important. And then ultimately, um, you know, with SEL, how students feel affects how they learn. Because if there's challenges at home or there's other things in their life, other baggage that's in their life, that's going to impede. No matter, you may have the greatest lesson planned, but if
Yeah.
that child's mind is not there, it's not going to penetrate. It's not going to resonate for that child. So how students feel affects how they learn. And then I also take that a step further with teachers, because all the emphasis for SEL gets placed on the student, but SEL is just as important for teachers. And so how teachers feel affects how students learn. Because if the teacher is having challenges in their life, I know being professional, but at some point that's going to translate to something, a loss in the class, in their instructional practice. So how students feel affects how they learn, how teachers feel affects how they learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot there, right? So let's start with that idea of that sort of like shift or transition between, I don't know, maybe you would call it like traditional education, where where the teacher, has all the knowledge and is giving the knowledge to the children. They're the ones who are have all the information, and they're like filling these empty vessels, right? They're
The
giving
sage
the
on the
knowledge.
stage.
Exactly. To now you're thinking about how to approach each student individually, because like you said, everybody is different and everybody has these different experiences that will affect their learning, right? So how do we do that? So I know, like when I was teaching in the US, so sometimes we had huge classes. Sometimes I had 50 students in my class, and it's very difficult to not only learn everybody's name, but also connect with them personally, and build a relationship with that student. And it seems like when you're thinking about social emotional learning, you would have to value those relationships and make an effort to build those relationships so that you can know how to best sort of help that child. So how do we deal with that, with like huge classes, building those relationships with those kids when our time and our our energy is limited because of the sizes of our classes?
That's a great question. I think I mean, it's going to be about your philosophy,
Yeah.
your instructional practice. All those pieces are going to tie in. You have to. I think the challenge that SEL faces trying to penetrate the education, like the classes, trying to get into the regular classes, is
Mm-hmm.
that I think the approach is misguided, in the sense that SEL vendors, for lack of a better term, will have some sort of a canned curriculum or package that they want to sell to schools. And they'll want to go in and say, go into like an English class, or approach a school and say, embed this SEL curriculum. It's so important now. We're coming out of COVID, mental health, stress, etc. So the timing is right for SEL, but I think the approach is misguided, because SEL is such a huge field. Like, it could be its own subject area on its
Yeah.
own, right? Because it's about psychology, behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so the approach, and phys ed, I think, is ideally suited for SEL to be integrated seamlessly. However, again, I think the approach is that SEL initiatives that come through districts, etc., want to take the whole SEL bucket, for lack of a better term, and say,
Mm-hmm.
do everything in this bucket. So, if we're looking at like the CASTLE framework, which is probably the most known framework, taking those 5 competencies and saying, okay, do everything in those 5 competencies, is overwhelming when you have not a phys ed teacher or any other teacher saying, okay, my plate's already full with my curriculum right now, and you're saying take SEL and add this on here, plus I'm limited with my time, etc., right? So you've got all those pressures.
Yep.
And then what do I give up? And so I think that's the challenge that teachers face, is that, okay, there's too much SEL stuff coming. They value it, they know it's important, but they can't mesh it and just seam it together. And so, in a roundabout way to answer your question, I think my approach is to start small.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I'm thinking I'm going to use PE as an example. And this is actually something I did a webinar on. Pick one aspect of your practice. For example, dynamic warm-ups.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one competency. So I'm going to select self-awareness. Then I want to pick one element from that self-awareness competency, which is identifying emotions. So all I want to do in my dynamic warm-up is have the kids being self-aware by identifying emotions. Now, if they don't know, and most kids don't really know about emotions, you're going to have to do some backfilling on that, and you're going to have to explicitly teach them what I would call emotions 101. So, what is an emotion? There's no such thing as a good or a bad one. What's the difference between emotions and feelings? That kind of stuff. So you're going to have to do a little backfilling on that. But then my idea for integrating SEL, because the other thing with phys ed, the challenge especially with phys ed, is because it's an activity-oriented course, and we see our students in such a limited time in terms of frequency and in time. We don't want them to be sedentary. So a lot of the SEL stuff that you're going to see is about bullying or stress management or something like that, which involves them sitting down and talking. And that's the last thing physical educators want to see in their classes. They want the kids moving for the most part. So that's why I think there's some resistance to it. And so that's why I sort of came up with this strategy of, okay, I've seen on Twitter teachers posting using zones of regulation as an example, and kids would tap in on a different color as they come into class or tapping out. And that's a great start, but given the class sizes that you have, my brain, my hard drive gets full, so I can't remember whether Glenn tapped in on a yellow or a blue or, where he was. And so it's not enough of a visual for me as the teacher. And so what I sort of created was this, I said, okay, when students arrive to my class, how do I know what frame of mind? How do I know they're ready to learn? Like when kids walk into your gym, well, I know you don't have kids, you're not in the classroom anymore, but when kids were arriving in your gym, we as educators make the assumption that those students are ready to learn or are willing to learn in a learning state. And that's a big assumption that we make, which is incorrect, because they are all at different states.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
This little SEL piece that I'm starting to try to promote is, let's try to let's teach the kids to help them identify what their state is when they come into the class. And so rather than the zones of regulation tap in, where they just tap once and go, I've sort of created this 4-station approach, which basically uses the same colors, the blue, green, yellow, and red. And what the kids do is they go to those stations. So if you come in and I just say, how are you feeling today? And so I've done a little bit of pre-teaching to this. I've told you what the blue is. The blue is like your brain is not really awake. You're feeling tired, you're bored, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Green is you're calm, alert, focused. Yellow, you're kind of, confused, anxious, a little worried. And then red is you're mad, you're angry, right? So I could just simply have signs up and have the kids go to those I just simply say, go to the station, the color that best reflects how you're feeling right now. Yeah. And then once they're there, that gives me a visual. So if I have 75% of my class in the blue station, that's got to impact. That's got to give me immediate feedback to impact my instruction for the day, because I can't forge trying to teach a lesson when 75% of my class is in that blue zone. They're tired, they're bored, they're drained, whatever. So if they're in that blue zone, I need to wake their brains up. If 75% of the class populates the red station, they're in that heightened state that anything that you say to them doesn't penetrate. So how do I get them to de-escalate to get back down to the green? If 75% of my class shows up and they all are in that green station, I'm licking my chops, I can go. So all of this is just a little simple warm-up act that I integrate into my warm-up. So what I do with each of those 4 stations and colors, I've got specific exercises that target how the state of the brain is in each of those colors.
Okay.
And that's how I try to, it's basically a self-regulation activity to getting them to learn how to self-regulate. And that's really the key with social emotional learning that I think a lot of vendors are missing in their packaging, is not teaching the skill of self-regulation and how to do that. Most of them are doing something around yoga or breathing, which, okay, that's just one piece. But if the yoga and the breathing is not necessarily going to work in that red anger state.
Yeah, because they're too far off. And there was something. So, hey, real quick, your mic is kind of rubbing up against your jacket, and it's causing like a little crackle. I don't know if you, yeah. But I was going to say, there was a podcast I did recently, and they were talking about, kind of the point of mindfulness and mindfulness exercises is to focus on the now, like focus on what's going on around you, focus your attention on being present. And kids are almost default present. They're already there, and they know they're feeling what they're feeling. And like you said, sometimes they need a little bit of help to kind of be able to evaluate that and then go on and make good decisions based on that feeling. And the first part of that would be identifying how they're feeling. And then sometimes when we take the whole class and we say, okay, everybody's doing this specific breathing exercise so that we can all be in that green zone, that's not what some of the kids need. And so what I used to do when I was teaching kinder is we would teach them all little types of different sort of responses to how they feel. And then I would tell them, okay, you guys decide what you need to be able to be ready. And then I would give them a few minutes. Some kids would go run and come back. Some kids would sit there and breathe. Some kids would talk to their friends, whatever they needed. And then once the window kind of closed, and it was like, okay, now we're all listening and we're all paying attention. But I left it up to them to kind of decide. And the other thing I would do is I'd have this little feelings wheel. And so when they're actually doing their activity, and so, we'd start off with some sort of instant activity, and they had plenty of choices to figure out what they wanted to do in that instant activity. As long as they were kind of moving, getting their heartbeat up, I would go around individually and say, okay, tell me how you're feeling. And if there was ever like a negative response, I would say, okay, what can we do to help you? Why are you feeling that way? What can we do to help you get to one of the positive responses? And a lot of times it was something small. Like I'll never forget this one time, this little girl was very, very, very upset. And I said, tell me how you're feeling. And she said, I'm mad, I'm really, really mad. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? Can we help you so we can get to some of these more positive sort of responses? And she said, well, I went to the dentist earlier and I forgot to get my sticker. I didn't get my sticker, and I'm just, I'm so, and she was, she's 5 years old, and it was the worst thing ever. And so I said, okay, can I give you a sticker? And she said, yeah, that would be great. So I didn't have any stickers, but I had these little dots that we were using for assessment. And so I got a little dot and I drew a little happy face on it. And I go, here, I got you a sticker, and I put it on her shirt. And she was like, I'm ready. This is what I needed. I needed that little dot with a little happy face on it. And actually, she put it on her wrist. She was all happy. She put it on her wrist, and she was ready to learn after that. And that to me was like like an eye-opening moment where it was like sometimes it just takes a tiny piece of effort to help somebody, and then it changes their whole dynamic. It changes their whole day. It changes their whole perception of what's going on in that class. Because if I would have let her be angry, then PE would have been a bad experience for her. But just because she got that little dot with that little happy face on it, then all of a sudden she was in a better place. So I'm thinking about, like, I see a lot, like you mentioned on Twitter, there's a lot of there's a lot of videos that are shared, and I'm thinking about these teachers. I see a lot of this, and I know there's a time and place for this, but that idea of like getting everybody together and giving them all the same, message, and sometimes even telling them how they feel. So if you lose, you should do this. If you're angry, you should feel this, or you should not feel that. You know what I mean? And sometimes to me, that's like it's the opposite message of what like SEL should be. Where you were saying before, it's kind of like identifying the emotion and then evaluating it and figuring out what to do with it so that you can make positive decisions for yourself and the people around you. Instead of me saying, this is how you should do it, this is how you should feel.
The one size fits all solution obviously does not allow for differentiation.
Right.
And so, again, if that's what's frustrating about education, because we preach one thing, but in practice, it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we're saying, yes, students are individuals, everybody progresses at their own rates. We need to differentiate our instruction, etc., equipment. Yet we just use these one size fits all solutions because it's easy.
It's easy
And it's quick.
Mm-hmm.
Your solution with that student was brilliant because you took 2 minutes, if that.
Yeah, not even.
To dive in to what was her problem. But that was also, as you said, establishing the relationship or building the relationship with her. Again, which is one of the competencies, the SEL competencies, right? So because you took 30 seconds to a minute to find out what was wrong with her through probing questions, you were able to turn her day around and make that a positive experience for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many opportunities like that present themselves throughout throughout a PE lesson if you are,
if you see them,
providing,
if you find them.
Yeah, and if you're providing time for that, for providing time for feedback on, like on their emotional state, I do think that's something that we kind of overlook sometimes. I remember there was a PE teacher that talked a lot about, on Twitter and some of these social media platforms that we were a part of, that talked a lot about like we don't have time to develop competency in certain standards, right? So then what do we do with the time that we have? And it's important the way we use the time that we have. And I get that and I understand that. But I also think that, if you take the amount of hours that it takes to develop competency in a particular activity or movement, and then you factor in the emotional state. If you're in a negative emotional state, it's going to take even longer, or it's going to like completely turn you off to that activity. And if you're in a positive state, then it totally changes that time dynamic, So I wonder what you think about that, and I wonder how that actually affects, competency when we're thinking about that.
100% agree. I think it affects your mindset,
Yeah.
right? So if you're feeling good about yourself, you have that growth mindset. You're open to learn. You're open to try new things. Um, if you are angry or fearful or sad, um, your brain is not in that state that is ready to learn. And
Yeah.
and I don't think enough educators think about that. They make the assumption that you're in school, therefore you're ready to learn. And so it's more of a stick versus, I don't want to say a carrot, but it's more of a compliance issue,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yep.
here, it's your job to be ready to learn. And I I just don't think the right that's the right angle to look at with students, because they're kids.
Yep.
They're not young adults. The same parallel is with sport, right? We treat young kids in sport like little adults, and we
Mm-hmm.
try
Mm-hmm.
to we have the same expectations. So I think we have to sort of think of they're kids. They don't think like us. They don't respond like us. Their brains are different, and we have to understand how their brains work. And all their brains are at different emotional states. And I think we really have to tap into that emotional state and understand their emotional state. And then once we do, which you did with that little girl, once you understand their emotional state, then you can draw on your experience and your expertise to come up with a strategy.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of like an anxious state, fitness testing and assessment in general has been a big topic lately, especially on social media with our circles. And so to me, there was a very interesting article that was shared by Justin O'Connor that looked at the emotional state of students right before their fitness test and then right after their fitness test. And a lot of the kids were talking about how anxious they were and how nervous they were about the whole thing. And then afterwards, there was some really, really revealing comments about how they felt about themselves and about, their self-image based on the results of those fitness tests. Now I know that there's a time and place for fitness testing, but I think it kind of comes back to that idea of one size fits all. Everybody is doing the pacer test. This is how we're testing your aerobic capacity, period. And we're all going to do it together, and everybody's going to see you, and everybody's going to know your result, and that's the way we do it. So I think sometimes it goes back to that. Okay, for one, it's sort of mandated in some states, and then two, it's easy. You just put everybody on a line and just put put the audio on and go. It's pretty easy. Um,
It's lazy.
what do we do with that? What do we do with that? I mean,
I would
they're
love to deep
this.
fix that. I know
So
Fitness
say
Gram
more. Yeah, go ahead.
would be pissed off with me for saying that, but because it's a revenue generator for them now.
Mm,
So it I, I always like this statement. When will what we know change what we do?
yeah. Yes.
We know FitnessGram is not beneficial, even with the changes going from what it used to be with specific metrics and standards to okay into these zones now. It's still a labor intensive activity. Um, I think it's still antithetical to the goal of what we're trying to do with kids is promote a love of lifelong fitness, but we're actually turning kids off.
Yeah.
So it goes back to our why. Why are we fitness testing? what is the purpose of that? And unfortunately, for most of the schools, especially in the US system, you have to report on it as a state standard.
Right.
And so there's pressure to do that with that particular tool. But if that pressure was gone, if that was removed, then you could have a fitness test as a true diagnostic, which is what testing is. If we remove the word fitness and we just have testing, why do schools test? They test because it's a diagnostic tool. You're trying to find out, whether your program or your instruction is working or not. You're trying to find out what the deficiencies are for the students so that they can work on those. Mm-hmm. That's what testing was originally designed to be, was a diagnostic tool. And now it's more of a data tool rather than a diagnostic.
Yeah, and I can't help but feel that there's also this, you talked about that idea of compliance in the classroom, and the students have to be compliant to, certain things in a very teacher-centered classroom, and we don't have time, or we don't have room for all the wiggling and all the individual aspects of that come with learning. And I feel a lot of times that like fitness testing and fitnessgrams specifically has that same sort of compliance for teachers. It's like you have to do this. You have to teach them these specific exercises. You have to give them in this specific way, and then you have to report in this specific way. You're in the healthy fitness zone or you're not in the healthy fitness zone, and this is how we're reporting it.
It's too rigid.
Instead of again, like sort of honoring not only the students' autonomy, but the teachers' autonomy and the way they're going to teach their standards and the way they're going to teach their curriculum. It's a very rigid approach to something that I feel could be a very valuable experience and diagnostic for the students and the teachers.
Like Fitnessgram has a purpose. I just don't think it has the school setting is the right purpose. So because how long does it takes? What, 3 weeks to do it? 2 to 3 weeks, depending.
I mean, depending on how you do it, right? I talked a little bit on a previous podcast about how I used to do it in Texas. In Texas we had a mandate, a fitnessgrams mandate, and we had to test our kids through 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders in 5 different exercises. And so I did sort of a fitness individual pursuits unit where, kids would choose what they wanted to do, and we kind of went through the whole unit. And the fitness testing part of it was hidden, sort of. Like I didn't say, okay, this is our fitnessgrams day and we're all going to do it together. We would do it with self-assessment in the beginning of class. And so I was still getting my numbers. I was still, doing the mandated things that were expected of me, but it wasn't super emphasized. So we did goal setting, we did all these other things, but based on their interests. It wasn't about the fitness test. Like you did 5 push-ups, okay, next time you should do 6 push-ups. That didn't matter to me because the push-up test was just about measuring one way of measuring your muscular strength, right? And that's it. So we shouldn't take too much time or energy or effort into that one particular thing. There's many ways to kind of evaluate your self-assess yourself in your muscular endurance or muscular strength or what have you. And so I took them through all kinds of different experiences. They got to choose what they wanted to improve. And then as a warm-up or like in the beginning of class, we would look at self-assessing one aspect of the fitnessgrams, and they would write it down. I would take that data and information and then, input it, into the system. And so that's the other part of fitnessgrams to me that was sort of problematic. That idea of everybody sort of doing it a little bit differently, because everybody had different situations. I taught in Houston, Texas, and I was outside 100% of the time, where other people had gyms. Other people were literally teaching in hallways or in cafeterias, or I mean, the setting is just absolutely, it's different in every school. And so there's this sort of built-in unreliability to a specific standardized test that's given in that way. Does that make sense?
100%. Because I was also going to add to that FitnessGram is also taking all that data and using that as well.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that data is unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
For all the reasons that you just stated. Yet, how many people are questioning their data?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly. And
go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say, like, and I know there are some people out there, like yourself, but they're few and far between that are actually like putting attention to this and kind of questioning that idea. Um, and I think that needs to be talked about. And so, more and more I'm realizing that there are these conversations that need to be had that sometimes people shy away from. And I understand that. I understand sometimes conflict, or sometimes, addressing something that we've done for so long because we've always done it that way, is difficult. And change is sometimes very difficult too. But I do think that those things need to be talked about, and at least like we talked about in the beginning of the show, at least put on the table and say, like, well, this is one perspective, this is another perspective, this is one way to do it, this is another way to do it. And so that kind of brings me to, you talked a little bit about instructional practices that could help with sort of, emphasizing social and emotional learning. But I think the same thing with like assessment. Like, what are some instructional practices that you would recommend, or that you see that are more beneficial uh, to sort of creating an environment that is more student-centered, not only in just the activities that we do, but the environment as a whole, and even the assessments? Like, what are some instructional practices that you have encountered, or that you would suggest to teachers that would help them transition to a more student-centered approach?
Ideally, if I had my magic wand and could wave it, um,
Yeah.
I would want certainly fourth grade and up, but I think it's also possible in K to 3, kids to generate student portfolio.
Mm. Yeah.
And so, because the biggest question that really needs to be answered first with assessment is, what is it that we're communicating about student learning, and how are we communicating that? So it changes, that question changes from the perspective, instead of what are we reporting on as marks for physical education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you start talking about communicating student learning, right away you're talking about, okay, well, what does Glenn learn that's different from what Jorge's learned?
Mm-hmm.
And so the student portfolio is a way for us to be able to differentiate and highlight what we are truly learning. Because again, and I think we might have touched on this in our previous conversation, how much, because of the limited time, the frequency and time that we meet students for physical education, how do we know our instruction was the intervention?
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the kids who would do well on a traditional skills test or whatever, they're not developing that skill necessarily in class, because we're not giving them enough repetitions and feedback to improve. So if they're getting that from a trainer or a coach outside, if they're active outside, then they're going to improve. And if they don't have access to that, they go home, they don't have that environment, or they're a couch potato or whatever various reasons, they don't improve. I always used to tell my student teachers, my pre-service teachers, Larry Bird didn't develop his basketball prowess in a phys ed class.
Right.
So you just don't have the time in the class setting, physical education class setting, to develop any type of high proficiency, and I hate that word mastery, because you just can't do it. So I think student portfolio is the way to go, because now you're putting the onus and the responsibility with the student. But you can't just say, okay, you're going to create a student portfolio for me by the end of the term. Like, you still have to scaffold this. You still have to teach them about, okay, what is acceptable evidence? So you have to go through those types of learning pieces with them. So there's still a teaching aspect to it. But then, you start taking standards, for example, and then you present that to the student. I'm just trying to pick one here, for example, that I might take out of our curriculum. Let's say, okay, so for our fourth grade, the learning outcome would have been engages in vigorous physical activities continuously for 7 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I would give that statement to the students and say, okay, what evidence can you provide for me that demonstrates that you can engage in vigorous physical activity for whatever? And then I may have to start unpacking some of the terms. Like, okay, if they don't know what vigorous is, okay, well, that gives me an opportunity to teach them about the perceived exertion scale, right? Because we hear the term moderate to vigorous physical activity, but what is MVPA? How do we define that for the kids? So when you start with that piece, then you have to start unpacking with the students of what do they understand, or what do they need more clarification of in that learning statement for them to then be able to, okay, now I can go and start collecting my evidence. So student portfolio would be the way to go. But then the whole education system is really not set up for it, because school districts, states, governments want marks. They want letter grades, they want percentages. And so there again becomes a clash between innovation and being progressive with old school infrastructure.
And I feel like there's a certain level also of how would I say this, sort of not bucking the system, where, because again, in my experience in Texas, in Houston ISD, we gave for a 9-week period an E, an S, or a U, and that's it. That's all that was communicated to the parents. And to me, that wasn't enough, right? It wasn't good enough. It didn't say anything about anything that was going on in physical education or their learning or anything like that. So I tried different strategies. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I tried different strategies to kind of help students be more informed of their learning journey. And so I tried things like solo taxonomy, portfolios, loosely based on Seesaw and things like that. And so I would tell the kids, you're going to get a grade. You're going to get a grade on the report card, and it's going to be an E, an S, or a U. And that's fine. That's your grade, But I want you to also be aware of what you're learning in physical education. So it's not just the E or the S or the U that you quote unquote earned in class. I want you to know where you are in each unit, in each lesson, in each activity, and I want you to see your growth. And so solo taxonomy was a really good way to do that, because we would kind of, like you said, break down the standard. They would help me figure out the success criteria for each level. They would in the beginning of the unit kind of self-assess, and then you could see their growth throughout the unit. And so they were a part of that whole process. They were a part of the whole process of unpacking. They were part of the whole process of creating the success criteria. And then there was a visual rubric that would give them where they were in the assessment process. So it was an ongoing assessment also. It wasn't just like, okay, at the end of the unit, we're going to do this, and then that's your grade. And so I feel like, again, there's this in the system, there's this sort of lack of allowing teachers, and I'm not even sure how to verbalize it, but allowing teachers to kind of like have that autonomy to be able to do those types of things, unless you kind of go away from the standard system and say, I'm going to do this regardless of, the constraints that I'm put in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and maybe that's why teachers who want to be innovative kind of move to charter schools or independent schools for that reason.
Because, like you said, it's almost not set up for that. So what do we do in that system? Because I feel like there's so many teachers that want to that they're like right there on the cusp, and they want to be innovative, they want to be creative, they want to like that move our profession forward. And I know that's one of the things we talked about before also, is like how do we do that? How do we move our profession forward? And a lot of times it's just like having the courage enough to kind of buck the system a little bit and say, you know what, I'm going to do these things because I value my students.
Yeah, but it's so hard, because if your administrator is not on board, because they're having to answer to the command chain, then it stifles that creation. It stifles that innovation.
So then I wonder how much of that responsibility comes back on the teacher. Because okay, I'll give you a little story about me and how I kind of got in trouble with my appraiser. Because okay, again, in Houston, the appraisal system, your supervisor comes in and watches a lesson and then determines what kind of a teacher you are based on that one lesson. Okay, not ideal. So I was doing a lesson, and we were doing a cooperative learning lesson, and it was great. I thought it went fantastic. It was phenomenal. But it's messy, It's not straightforward. It's not linear. It's messy. We were doing a jigsaw on. I think we were creating a game or something like that. And again, I thought it was great. Kids were engaged. There was a lot of learning going on. There was reflection at the end, and I got some pretty low marks on instructional practice, or I don't know what it was. And so I had a meeting. I set up a meeting with my appraiser, and I said, well, why did you give me these low marks? And she said, well, I think physical education should be more like, what if you just put the kids in lines and you did like relay races?
I'm in pain.
So, right. So there's this like misunderstanding, and this misunderstanding of what physical education is. Yeah, right. And then this obvious like clash of philosophies on education and physical education in general. And so my job then was to educate my appraiser on my philosophy of physical education and why.
Does she have phys ed training? Does she have phys ed background? Okay.
No, there you go. No, of course not.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I went through that process, and I said, okay, these are the things that I do, and this is why I do the things that I do. This is where I got, these cooperative learning strategies from, and this is the book that I got it for this and this and whatever, right? And so I went through this whole process of saying, like, this is why I do the things that I do. But it was up to me to understand why those things were important and how they fit into not only my curriculum and physical education, but we were an IB school, we were an IB school, and how this fits into inquiry-based learning and how it's going to benefit our kids, So if I put them in relay race lines and we just did, relay races back and forth and the kids were waiting and I told them exactly what to do. I mean, where is the learning? What is going on? They're just running and they're just getting their heartbeat up, which I guess is great. You know, there's a time and place for that as well. But there's so much more we could be doing with the limited time that we have. And this is something I had to sort of educate my appraiser on in order for her to understand my stance and philosophy of physical education. So I go back to how much of that is our responsibility as well. Like if we want to be creative, if we want to do these innovative things, if we want to get the most out of our students, how much of it is our responsibility to be able to educate the stakeholders of our school that this is what physical education should and could be. It's not lining up and doing relay races all day long.
I mean, that's what makes people like you as leaders. That's what defines you as leaders in our field. Advocating, trying to educate those who don't understand what we do and why we do it. Unfortunately, I hate to say most, but I'm going to assume most phys ed teachers would not take the time, would just simply feel frustrated with that process and just go, screw it.
Yeah.
So again, you know, it goes back to emotion and mindset.
Yeah.
Because that affects your social emotional state.
Yeah, and talk more about that, because you mentioned that, and I wanted to get back to that, where you talked about, you know, social emotional learning isn't just for the kids; it's also for the teacher. Like, talk more about that, like the emotional mindset and how that affects teaching.
Well, just think if Saudi Arabia lost, well, they were expected to lose, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably not a good example. Think of a time where you've had something tragic or sad happen in your life, and then you had to go in and teach either immediately or the next day.
Yep.
Your mind is just, even though you try as hard to meet the needs of those little kiddos in front of you, you're not you just can't mentally be 100% there. Just physiologically, we just can't do that. We're human beings. So how you feel affects the way you teach. That's going to be given. If if you come in, you're elated, you're happy, that's going to translate to the kids. If you're sad, you're angry, they're going to see that. Like, they're sharp. And so how you feel affects how you teach, and how kids feel affects how they learn.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we've all felt that as teachers, where you come in, I mean, even physically, like if you're sick, or if you're not feeling well, sometimes you're just not in the right mindset, and you're just like, oh, I gotta kind of fake it till I make it, right? And so you kind of put a smile on, and you try to, you know what though, being out of the classroom this year was sort of emotionally a difficult transition for me. So I still try to do like activities during school where I pull, you know, a certain number of kids to do different activities. Like we did a golf activity last year, and they kind of enroll themselves in these during school activities. And so, you know, so we try to do that, and I try to be a part of those activities, and I still kind of am able to do a little bit of teaching and building relationships with some of these kids, and so I still try to do that part of it so that I don't lose kind of that connection to. Yeah, for sure. But I have felt also that when I come into work and I'm a little bit kind of like not there, you know, I'm not into it that day, and as soon as I get in front of the kids, it changes my whole demeanor. So I think it's kind of like finding those little bright spots and then kind of leaning on them, you know. That's always helpful for me. Yeah.
But getting back to your original question on that, it's just I really think that we need to pay more attention to the emotional state of whoever we're working with, whether it's kids or our colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
because we just make assumptions that everybody's feeling okay. And some people
Yeah.
hide it.
Yeah, and there's that great quote, and I don't remember how it exactly goes, but something about how, everybody's kind of, you never see what's going on internally with people, and so you always want to be conscious of what the person you're talking to is kind of going through. Everybody has their own little battles.
Well, not making
And
assumptions. That's easier said than done.
yeah, for sure. Yep, for sure. So I know we're kind of getting to the end of the hour here, so I wanted to sort of give you the last word. And if you have anything, any kind of sort of like thing that you want to, plug, or websites, or if people wanted to get a hold of you, let everybody know what the best way to do that would be. So I'll give you the last word. Do you have any sort of last message for our listeners?
Yeah, I think certainly identifying the problem that we're in right now. And the problem that we're in right now is that, in general, with society, is that society is demanding more of our kids, our students' minds, and asking
Mm-hmm.
increasingly less of their bodies. So that's kind of the societal problem that we have. And then our problem, I think, that we're facing in physical education is that phys ed is so driven for acceptance by education and society that, I've been in this now for over 40 years. I found that phys ed has tried to bend over backwards to fit in with any trend, any movement, pardon that pun, and kind of lost sight of its true purpose. So I think it's time for phys ed to realize that education and society don't care about phys ed except they think phys ed is sport. And so let's be who we are. I think that's what we have to try to do with phys ed, is just go back to understand what is our true purpose, and let's just be true to that and do that really well.
Nice, nicely said. Um, if somebody wanted to continue the conversation or get a hold of you, what is the best way for somebody to reach you?
Certainly Twitter. We'll see how long Twitter lasts, but certainly Twitter. Connect with me on my LinkedIn page or my email. And I think you've got my email as well. You could put that in the notes. So
Yeah, I'll put all that in the show notes.
yeah.
All right. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for talking with me, and I appreciate all the work that you do for physical education.
Well, you deserve the thanks for putting all of these podcasts together, because there is a vast amount of knowledge that's there. So it's just a pleasure and a treat to be a piece of that. Thank you for having me.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.